where any office boy or young mechanic can be a panic with just a good-looking pan. And any shop girl can be a top girl, here's businessman. Hooray for Hollywood! You may be homely in your neighborhood. Be an actor.
Oh, and it's Movie Mania time once again, or I should say Movie Magic time, because today our special guest is Rick Baker, who is a very prominent makeup artist and special effects wizard, who has just completed a project which could be one of the biggest fantasy horror films of the year, of the decade, shall we be that bold? And that is the new John Landis production, American Werewolf in London, which Rick designed the werewolf makeup and the wolf itself and some other makeups, which we'll be taking a look at later. Well, first of all, Rick, I'd like to welcome you to Movie Mania.
Thank you.
And let's start off with your early career. You started about 10 years ago in feature films, right?
Let's see, that's about right, yeah, about 10 years ago.
And your first job was?
A low-budget, horrible monster movie called The Octo Man.
Now, was it a horror movie or a horrible movie?
Both.
Both, I see, all right. And you were strictly makeup on that?
I actually didn't do makeup. I built the Octo Man suit, and we did you know, those little mechanical effects that were involved in the film.
What are some more of those earlier highlights from your career there?
Oh, boy.
Some great titles.
Well, there's It's Alive, which is...
Well, that's big time. That's big time. That's big time stuff.
Oh, I did a film that was called Sweet, Mean, and Deadly that I never heard of since then.
That describes our production style.
Yeah. Let's see, I did a film called The Chameleons. That was an odd film. It was about a black guy who was masquerading as a mutilated white guy. And it was a real weird, strange.
G-rated. Yeah, family fare. Around the early 70s, were you not an assistant to Dick Smith?
I met Dick Smith, who I had always idolized, I still do, when I was 18.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I'd already taught myself quite a bit through trial and error on how to do makeup, but I had the opportunity to meet Dick, and I spent a day with him where he gave me a notepad. And he said, here's everything you're going to need to know on this business, you know, and I wrote it all down. And, I worked with him on The Exorcist, and that was in the early 70s, yeah.
And you worked on The Exorcist. It was his makeup, but you...
I just was a lab assistant. I just did the work that he really didn't want to do, kind of, you know, more of the labor involved. He did all the creative work.
And then after that, you moved on your own, and you did Schluck eventually, which was, I guess, a low budget horror movie.
Yeah, $60,000.
Which is cheap by any standards. It was cheap 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's cheap. It's amazing that he got it made for that. A lot of it was deferred. The payments were deferred. Like the money that I would have made on the film, I still haven't seen. It was all deferred payment. You know.
And that begins your, what now, I guess, is a decade-long association with John Landis.
Yeah. That's right. Schluck was one of my first films, all right.
What was the idea behind the making of Schluck? What was it that attracted him to go and do this?
Well, John first of all wanted to make a film, and he knew it was going to have to be a low-budget film. He and his partner Jim O'Rourke, who American Werewolf was dedicated to, by the way, Jim's dead now. They started out to do a porno film, and he really didn't want to be involved with pornography. So he thought about a monster movie. We saw Trog. This film called Trog with Joan Crawford. Right. He says, this is so terrible. You know, this is really schlock. You know, and it gave him the idea to do Schluck, a terrible monster movie comedy. You know.
And that was that your first real solo? I'm going to go crazy with the makeup.
Just about, yeah. Octo Man,
in terms of freedom, and
I had some freedom. John and I disagreed somewhat on what Schluck should be, and it was towards John's concept more than mine. And I think he was right. You know, I wanted Schluck to be a little more on the human side of the missing link. And he wanted him to be ape side. You know, so.
Originally, I don't think it got very wide distribution, but it's quite a cult classic now.
It is, yeah. It's a funny film.
It's a staple of revival houses, even here in New York.
Is it?
Sure.
Great.
But even that far back, wasn't he thinking about what would become an American Werewolf in London?
He had actually written the script before Schluck, I believe.
That long ago?
Yeah, and we started talking about the film, and I was getting my ideas then.
And with the technology so much different 10 years ago than it is now, I mean, the special effects field, as some of our other guests have told us in past programs, has really gone a tremendous way in the last
10 years. Has really evolved a lot, yeah.
Well, what did you think? What were your ideas? I mean, was it substantially different? Were there entirely different concepts?
Well, some of the things actually that we even used in the film were techniques I wanted to do before I even met John. You know. And Doug Beswick and I, who did the Octo Man together, Doug still works with me as part of my company, EFX
Right.
Incorporated. Doug and I talked about a metamorphosis like this, even before I met John. And the hair growing technique that we used in the film, there's a shot in the transformation where you see the hair grow. It's an idea I had when I was a child.
Wow. Well, we're going to get to some more about that a little later on, but right now let's go back about 10 years to Rick Baker and John Landis and Schluck. And we'll be back with more conversation right after this excerpt. And that, of course, was a clip from Schluck, which is one of the classic low-budget horror movies. Real quick, before we get, as a kid yourself, you were a young fella, like all of us.
I used to be younger.
And getting older every day, right? What were your favorites, real quick?
Oh, I liked Frankenstein, I liked Charles Laughton, Hunchback of Notre Dame, King Kong, of course, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad was a real favorite film of mine.
So it's really a classical as far as fantasy horror film goes,
But I like a lot of the really bad ones too, like Plan 9 from Outer Space and The Creeping Terror. They're still some of my favorite films.
And those are the films that we try and keep alive on this program.
Great.
In keeping with our own budgets. But let's look at some still. This, I saw this still and I said, well, that's our director, but no, it isn't. This is actually a creature that you did for It's Alive, right?
Yeah, that was a film that Larry Cohen, he actually contacted me about that film when I was in New York living at Dick Smith's house working on The Exorcist.
Oh, is that right? And how did he get a hold of you?
I worked with Larry before, actually through John Landis. When John was editing Schluck, Larry said, hey, who did that makeup? I need somebody to do some gory stuff for a film, So I did about 3 films for Larry, and it was always one-day shoot. Like he put all the makeup in one day, so he only had to hire a makeup man for one day. Talking about shoot.
That's Larry. We know Larry Cohen on this show. And this, of course, is King Kong, and that is you.
Yep.
Monkeying around there. Gorillas are really a specialty of yours, aren't they?
Yeah, I became fascinated by gorillas when I started playing with makeup because I thought it was something that you could really do. You could do a pretty convincing gorilla costume, and they're just fascinating animals.
As a young guy, before you really set in on makeup, did you have any dreams of getting into the Willis O'Brien, Harryhausen stop motion type stuff?
Yeah, I did do stop motion. It's the same thing that's intriguing about stop motion as makeup, is that you're creating something that really doesn't exist and breathing life into it. In stop motion, you don't have the limitations that you do with makeup and design. So I did a lot of stop motion as a kid. My very first job was at a stop motion studio.
That's right. You worked for Clokey Productions, who produced the
Gumby show and a religious kids show called Davy and Goliath.
Right.
I didn't do any stop motion there. I just built the puppets.
Oh, well, I think a lot of us who are interested in this type of film, all of us who played around with Brownie 8mm cameras and whatnot, I think stop motion appeals to most of us because you have total control. You don't need 30-man crews and lots of actors.
Right, right.
And when you're toying around there at 12 and 13 years old, you really need that.
The old Brownie cameras, as you mentioned, I didn't have a single frame attachment on mine, and I had to just hit the button, and sometimes it'd take 5 frames, sometimes 10, and sometimes 1, So.
And here we got, now this is a rare shot. This is a behind-the-scenes shot of you and the baby.
Yeah, that was actually from It Lives Again. I can tell because I started to grow my beard, the full beard then. So. In that case, there was 3 baby monsters, all from the same mold because it cost too much money to make a new one.
And here, now these are some frame blow-ups from the Cantina sequence of Star Wars. Now, how did you get involved with Star Wars?
It was actually through some friends that I have. Dennis Murin, who's a friend of mine, that I met actually through Clokey's. We had a lot of stop-motion animator friends, was photographing, of course, a lot of the dogfight stuff and all. And the film was done in England originally, and Stuart Freeborn did a lot of stuff for the Cantina scene also. George wanted some new stuff and some slightly different designs, so Dennis recommended me, and I had a nice talk with George, and he said, go to it. I was doing The Melting Man at the same time.
Oh,
yeah.
So I guess it was really tough for you to...
Yeah, I had about 6 people that were working with me, and they did the majority of the work, actually. And then we used some old masks that I had made years before.
I could have sworn I saw some of that stuff in The Outer Limits years ago.
Some of it's very similar designs. The Cantina band members look a lot like an Outer Limits monster. It's kind of what George wanted.
And needless to say, nobody had any idea, et cetera, that Star Wars would take off.
When George explained what the movie was to me and I saw some clips of it, I said, boy, this is what I always wanted to see, but I didn't think it was going to do so well.
Well, fooled us all.
Yeah.
And now George is out in Marin County and going nuts. All right, we're going to go through these a little quickly. This is you, and you look like you're really having a good time here. This would be on the set of...
The Incredible Shrinking Woman. It was about 100 degrees that day, or 110 I think it actually was, and I was running around on all fours like a gorilla and sweating my brains out.
Boy, oh boy.
It was tough. I lose about 5 pounds a day.
But it's a lot cooler when you're just applying the makeup and letting somebody else sweat.
Yeah,
Well, we're going to take another look at some example of Rick Baker's fantastic makeup. We're going to see some very brief scenes with Rick in them from Incredible Melting Man, and after that we'll come back and get into something else, and then we'll be showing you some more film clips later on. Incredible is not only the word for the melting man, but for the shrinking woman, which that was also supposed to be a John Landis project, right?
Yeah, it was. It started out with Landis as the director, and Sidney, the part I played of this gorilla, was a major part in the picture. There was like Lily and her husband and the gorilla, you know. And because John and I both have such a love for the great apes like that, you know, it was going to be really a special movie. I'm sorry, actually, he didn't do it.
So you were signed already at the point where he was still involved?
Oh yeah, I was the first person to actually start getting paid on that movie. I think I even got before John because it takes so long to do this type of work, you know, and John realizes that. So he said, start Rick Baker right now so he can make the best suit that he can make. So.
That was kind of a tough shoot for you, wasn't it?
Well, it's always tough wearing something like that, yeah. But it's a tough life being a gorilla, you know.
Well, but I mean in terms of, I don't imagine you get plush trailers like the stars.
No, it is a little disappointing like that. There were, the very first day of shooting was actually in that still that you had with the fan blowing on me. Again, I said it was very hot, and you know, it wasn't just one suit. I had 12 different pairs of arms and 4 different heads and 2 different bodies and a lot of parts, which I loaded in the back of my truck. And I talked to the producer and said, you know, I'm going to need a place to put this stuff, and it takes some room to get into this suit, you know. Yeah, sure. So what they had was there's a thing they call a honey wagon. They have like these little tiny stalls, like a little toilet, you know. I said, okay, this is your dressing room. And I said, I couldn't even store all my stuff in there, you know. So I had no place to get dressed, which was common on King Kong too. There were days I just had to strip down on the set, put my suit on, and go do my shot. You know.
So as you mentioned before the show, I guess when you get typed into playing a gorilla,
they treat you like a gorilla. That's right.
Well, let's see a little more of this monkey shines in a clip from The Incredible Shrinking Woman, and then we'll be back to talk about your new release, American Werewolf in London.
Okay.
What the hell? Wow! That, my friends, if you're just tuning in, was Rick Baker here being a silly simian for The Incredible Shrinking Woman. But now, as we mentioned before, American Werewolf in London is just about to, 10 years in the making, we can say.
Almost,
is just about to spring full-blown on the American public.
It sure is.
Opens August 21st.
Come prepared.
Come prepared, that's right. We're going to be prepared because I understand there's some spooky, spooky stuff. You have got some effects in American Werewolf in London, which have never been duplicated, have never been, I should say, come anywhere close to, with the possible exception of the Howling.
Yes.
Now, what happened there, very briefly?
Very briefly, it's hard to make it brief. They approached me, you know, like you said, American Werewolf has been around for 10 years, and several times John says, we're going to do American Werewolf, and it fell through.
Right.
So he keeps saying, we're going to do American Werewolf, and then Joe Dante and Mike Fennell came up with the Howling. And they said, here you go, Rick, we want you to do this. Total creative freedom, you know. And I said, my chance to do my transformation, it's here, you know. I was very excited by it. So as soon as I started getting involved with that, John definitely got American Werewolf off the ground, so I could not be involved with the Howling. It wasn't fair to John. So I turned it over to my protege, Rob Bottin. And I taught Rob from the time he was 14. He practically lived with me. You know? And I told him how to do it, basically. You know, I said, this is what I was planning on doing, Rob. And we discussed all the different elements. And we actually were going to do a test film together, a test transformation, in which I actually did some sculptures. And I decided not to let him use those because they were too similar to what I would do in American Werewolf. So Rob took my ideas and put a little bit of himself into it and did a spectacular job. I'm really proud of him.
It certainly is a spectacular job, but as good as that is, I would think that American Werewolf posed more problems because the transformations in the Howling are
Yeah, they're very different films, first of all, you know, and The Howling if it were totally left up to me, I probably would have tended to gravitate towards that type of transformation, really, with horror film lighting. You know, you can do some neat stuff with light. And but just John's feeling was that he wanted this to have a certain reality to it. I mean, he was in this bright room. He didn't want to make it horror film transformation. It's very different, and it makes it much harder on me to do that type of work.
I'm sure it does, because as we said before, you've got no place to go, nowhere to cut, and you don't have the tricks. And from what I understand, this was all done, the transformation was done without any optical effects, no camera tricks, lab work?
It's all shot right there on the stage, like you're shooting an actor.
The final process, naturally we can't show the transformation, we're not going to tip that away, but for those people who are going to be going to see American Werewolf, just to keep in mind, about how long would you say the whole process was? First of all, the designing of the whole makeup, and then in terms of actual work time, how long did it take to change it?
Well, I started about 10 months before the production on the film, and we didn't have actors at that point, so I was testing the different mechanisms and all that we were building for the film. So we really had about 6 months working time to do not just the wolf, but all the other things, including the transformation. And it took us about a week to shoot the transformation.
A full week?
But most of the time, actually, in the actual time on the stage of shooting could have been compressed in a day, but the makeup time was so long. It would take me 10 hours some days to do the makeup. So the crew would have a late call while I was doing my makeup, and I had an early call. And I'd do this makeup, and we'd shoot only for maybe half an hour with him in that stage. And then there was nothing else we could do until the next day.
That must have been a very, very grueling period for David Naughton, who
It was terrible for David, and I got to really say that David has he was the most cooperative actor I've ever worked with, and I put him through the hardest stuff I'd ever done, and he just went for it. You know, he enjoyed it. I mean, I don't think he enjoyed the pain of it, you know, but he had a lot of fun with the makeups. Well,
your effort and David's effort certainly shows on the screen, because it is a phenomenal, those of us who've seen the preview, it's a phenomenal transformation, and we can guarantee you an unforgettable screen effect. We're going to go right now briefly to one final clip, this from An American Werewolf in London, and we'll be back to wrap up, and Rick has some things that he's going to show us. But right now, for a little sneak preview of our own, here's American Werewolf in London. And this looks like...
This is just watching that film, it does strange things to me, you know.
It sure does. We weren't taping a full moon out, but I think...
This is one of the appliances that we used in the transformation. It's already been used, so it's kind of shot away here, but it's an appliance that goes on the thumb with a claw on it also. It's made up and blends into the actor.
Oh, sitting right next to it, even now seeing it without the lights and without the other makeup and whatnot, it's still very, very impressive looking. And you have here something that, ooh, boy, ooh, is this icky, ooh.
That was the result of one of the wolf's attacks. It looks a lot better when you've got fresh blood on it. No, you know, it looks a lot worse, actually, I guess I should say. That's my hand, as a matter of fact.
Oh, it is? That's a cast of your hand?
The same hand was used, from the same mold was used in The Melting Man. There's a couple shots, too.
Boy, doesn't this look delicious. All right, and what else do we have
now,
here?
This is actually
interesting.
Yeah, this is a mechanical hand that we used in the part of the film where it's got a wrist movement that works like so. And if you can just hold this for me.
I'll hold this.
Now, yeah, see what you've got. You should see this. Now, if you can see these little levers here, when I pull a lever, it works the thumb. I don't know if that's that clear on this monitor here.
Now, we should explain that this is from a scene that takes place later in the film involving one of the other characters who has come to a rather sad end. And this, rather than doing makeup on the whole actor, you actually built a replica. A replica of the actor, yeah. It was a very sophisticated mechanical puppet. It was capable of doing quite a few things. And what else do you have? I've got this. This is